In today's episode, we dive into some of the most terrifying chimpanzee attacks ever recorded, from a world-renowned photographer who got too close to the wild, to an entire village terrorized by primates hiding behind trees. But first, let's start with what seemed like the perfect pet, a beloved chimpanzee raised in a suburban home, until one horrific day changed everything. 10-year-old Lily Morgan lived in a spacious country house in rural Pennsylvania with her parents, Robert and Catherine. The Morgans were wealthy pharmaceutical entrepreneurs who often traveled for business, leaving Lily in the care of various nannies. But what made the Morgan family truly unique was Max, a 7-year-old male chimpanzee that Robert had purchased as an exotic pet when Lily was only 5. Robert had always been fascinated by primates. When the opportunity came up in 2001 to buy a baby chimp from a bankrupt zoo, he didn't hesitate. Despite Catherine's concerns, Robert insisted that Max would be like a brother to Lily, and that these animals, when properly cared for, were completely safe. For the first few years, Max really was the perfect companion, playful, affectionate, and seemingly adored Lily. The Morgans spared no expense for their unusual family member. They built a spacious enclosure attached to the house, complete with climbing structures, toys, and even a small pool. Max had his own bedroom, complete with a custom bed and a TV. He ate dinner at the table with the family, used utensils, and drank from a glass. Visitors to the Morgan home were always stunned at how human-like Max's behavior was. However, as Max reached adolescence, subtle changes began to emerge. He became more territorial over his space and belongings. At first, the incidents were minor, things the Morgans dismissed as mischief. Max tore up a couch when left alone too long. He bit Catherine when she tried to take a chocolate bar from him that he had stolen from the pantry. He threw a tantrum when Lily had guests over, cutting a playdate short. Robert often reassured everyone that Max was just going through a phase, like any teenager. But Catherine had her doubts. She had read about chimpanzees and knew they became stronger and more unpredictable with age. The idea of sending Max to a sanctuary crossed her mind more than once, but Robert refused to consider it. Max was family. On a chilly October day in 2005, the Morgans were preparing for an overnight business trip to New York. They arranged for Lily to be watched by Jessica Winters, a 23-year-old grad student at the local university. Jessica had babysat Lily several times before, and the Morgans trusted her, especially around Max. She wasn't afraid of animals and had even worked at a local wildlife center, which convinced Robert she could handle it. At the time, regulations around exotic pets were lax, allowing families like the Morgans to keep dangerous animals with little oversight. While some states required permits, many had no restrictions at all, treating primates more like pets than wild, unpredictable animals. Only after high-profile attacks, like the tragedy about to unfold in the Morgan home, did lawmakers begin to push for stricter bans on private ownership of chimpanzees and other dangerous creatures. Before leaving, Catherine handed Jessica a detailed schedule for Lily, which was taped to the fridge. Normally, Max stayed in his enclosure when the family was away, but the note mentioned he might get lonely, and if he was calm, he could be let inside the house for an hour or so after lunch. Jessica confidently replied that she and Max got along well. As the Morgans' car disappeared around the bend, Jessica smiled at Lily and suggested a movie marathon or baking cookies. But Lily's eyes drifted to Max's enclosure, visible through the large windows. The chimpanzee was watching them intently, his dark eyes tracking their every move. Lily eagerly chose baking, noting that Max loved cookies. The morning went pleasantly. Chocolate chip cookies, board games, and the first Harry Potter movie. But by early afternoon, Max's cries grew louder and more persistent. Something wasn't right. Lily brushed it off, saying Max always got restless around this time, and that her dad usually let him into the house. Jessica hesitated, remembering Catherine's note. Max should only be let in if he was calm. She asked if this was normal. Lily assured her it was just Max's way of seeking attention. Jessica would soon realize how wrong she was. Against her better judgment, she followed Lily to the back door. As they approached, Max suddenly went silent, waiting near the entrance. Lily insisted he was fine. After a brief pause, Jessica opened the door and Max stepped in without resistance. He hugged Lily and settled on the couch with a picture book. Everything seemed normal until Jessica went to the bathroom, asking Lily if she could stay with Max. The girl, still seated next to the chimpanzee, said they were just reading. Jessica had barely closed the bathroom door when a piercing scream froze her in place. She bolted down the stairs, taking them two at a time. What she saw in the living room would stay with her forever. Max had completely transformed. His hair stood on end, his lips pulled back in a horrifying grimace. He had pinned Lily to the floor, his powerful hands gripping her arms. Blood streamed from a bite on the girl's cheek. Jessica screamed at Max, grabbed the nearest lamp, and hurled it at the chimp. It struck him in the back, and he released Lily for a moment, but then turned toward Jessica with a guttural roar that shook the walls. In that split second, Lily escaped, blood running down her face. Jessica shouted at her, "Run! Lock yourself in your parents' bedroom!" Jessica stepped between Lily and the enraged chimpanzee. Lily sprinted toward the stairs, but Max was faster. With terrifying speed, he intercepted her at the base, grabbed her by the hair, and yanked her back so hard, Jessica heard a sickening crack. Lily's head slammed against the wooden floor. Jessica lunged forward, desperate to help. She grabbed the fireplace poker and swung it at Max, hitting him on the shoulder. The chimp howled in pain, but didn't retreat. Instead, he lunged at Jessica, knocking her to the floor with such force, it knocked the wind out of her. She frantically searched her pocket for her phone. Max turned his attention back to Lily, who now lay motionless at the bottom of the stairs. The chimpanzee began dragging her across the floor toward the kitchen. With trembling fingers, Jessica dialed 911 and frantically explained the situation. She dropped the phone and staggered to her feet. From the kitchen came sounds that would forever be etched in her memory, wet tearing of flesh and bone, interrupted by Max's frenzied growls. She grabbed a heavy crystal vase from the table and cautiously approached the kitchen doorway. What she saw made her instantly vomit. Max was hunched over little Lily's body. His hands and face were covered in blood. The child's face was unrecognizable, her body lifeless and still. Jessica hurled the vase with all her strength into Max's back, shattering it into pieces. The chimpanzee spun around, his eyes blazing with rage. He lunged at Jessica, who turned and ran toward the front door. Her fingers fumbled at the locks, while Max's heavy footsteps thundered behind her. As she flung the door open, she felt powerful arms grab her from behind, and teeth sink into her shoulder, tearing through muscle and tendons. The pain was blindingly white and searing, but a wave of adrenaline surged through Jessica, allowing her to elbow Max with her free arm and break free. She stumbled outside, fell down the front steps, and crawled along the gravel path, blood gushing from her shoulder. Behind her, Max stood in the doorway, his massive figure backlit by the house lights. For a moment, it seemed he would chase her, but then he turned and vanished back inside. Jessica managed to crawl to the road, where a passing driver found her and called for help. By the time rescuers arrived, she had already lost consciousness from blood loss. Inside the Morgan home, officers discovered a scene of unimaginable horror. Lily's body lay in the kitchen, brutally mutilated. Max had retreated to his enclosure, But when officers approached, he attacked, and they had no choice but to shoot him. The Morgans returned to a nightmare. Lily was gone. Their home had become a crime scene. The investigation revealed that Max had shown increasing aggression in recent weeks. The housekeeper recalled his possessiveness toward Lily, at times not letting others near her. A veterinarian had even recommended medication, but Robert had ignored the warning. Grief tore the Morgans apart. Within a year, they divorced. Robert left, unable to cope with the memories, while Catherine buried herself in community work, trying to build a life without Lily. The Morgan tragedy served as a grim warning. Chimpanzees are never truly tame. But Max was no anomaly. All over the world, people were learning the same brutal lesson. In the dense jungles of Africa, an experienced wildlife photographer got too close to danger, unaware that his last photograph would be the final moment of his life. James Harrington, a photographer from Montana, had spent 25 years capturing animals in their natural habitats across 6 continents. His work had graced the covers of National Wildlife, The Nature of the West, and other publications. At 48, he was known for his fearlessness and deep fascination with great apes, especially chimpanzees. His specialty was capturing expressions and almost human-like emotions in their eyes, which earned him a reputation as one of the best in his field. In April 2019, James embarked on what he considered the pinnacle of his career, a 3-month expedition to the remote Nongu forest in Rwanda to document a rarely photographed community of wild chimpanzees. Though primatologists had studied the group for years, there were few high-quality photos of them in the wild. James was determined to change that. The journey to Nongu was grueling. After landing in Kigali, James endured an 8-hour drive over rough dirt roads to Katabi, a remote village on the edge of the vast rainforest. The 620-square-mile area was home to 13 species of primates, including a significant chimpanzee population. His arrival drew curiosity. Foreigners were rare, and a lone American with expensive camera gear even more so. That evening, the village elder, Mutara, asked to meet James through a translator and warned him of the dangers. Chimpanzees were not the playful creatures shown in documentaries. They were territorial, unpredictable, and capable of savage violence. 3 years earlier, a local had been attacked, losing an eye and several fingers. James listened but didn't take the warnings seriously. He had photographed great apes all over the world. Gorillas in Uganda, orangutans in Borneo, chimpanzees in Tanzania. He understood their behavior, knew how to keep his distance, and when to retreat. To him, the villagers simply didn't understand. The next morning, he set out with a local guide named Emmanuel, a man raised in Katabi who knew the forest intimately. Emmanuel echoed Mutara's warning. The young chimpanzees in this area were different. They were less accustomed to humans and more aggressive. For a week, James followed the rules, keeping the recommended 80-foot distance and using telephoto lenses. But the dense canopy made lighting difficult, and the shots lacked the intimacy he sought. It wasn't the defining moment he had come for. His frustration grew. He needed to get closer. On the 10th day, he told Emmanuel he planned to go deeper into the territory, to a group led by a notoriously aggressive alpha male named Kega. Emmanuel hesitated. That group was unpredictable and rarely studied. But James had already made up his mind. He insisted, and Emmanuel reluctantly agreed. They set out before dawn, trekking 3 hours through increasingly thick jungle. The humidity was unbearable, and James's clothes were soaked with sweat, but his excitement grew as distant chimp calls echoed through the forest. By mid-morning, they found the group, about 20 chimpanzees scattered across a small clearing and nearby trees. Some groomed each other, others fed on fruit, and a few youngsters played tag on the lower branches. At the edge of the clearing sat Kega, a formidable male with silver streaks on his back and scars across his face, each one a testament to battles long fought. Emmanuel whispered to James that they should remain at the forest's edge and observe from a distance. James nodded, but his eyes were glued to the viewfinder. The lighting was perfect, dappled sunlight breaking through the canopy, casting a natural spotlight on the chimpanzees, bringing their expressions to life. But he needed to be closer. While Emmanuel was distracted, watching a mother chimp with an infant clinging to her chest, James began inching forward. He moved slowly, inch by inch, careful not to make a sudden sound. His heart beat with a cocktail of fear and exhilaration. This was the moment he lived for, the perfect shot, the one that captured the essence of these extraordinary creatures. He was now about 15 feet from Kega, half the recommended safe distance. Through the lens, he could see every detail of the alpha male's face. The intelligent eyes, expressive brows, the powerful jaw. James's finger hovered over the shutter. Just a few more shots and he would retreat. Then, Kega's head snapped up. He stared directly at James. Their eyes locked through the lens. Something shifted in the chimpanzee's gaze. A flash of recognition. And then what James could only interpret as anger. Kega's fur bristled. He rose to his full height, nearly 5 feet tall, yet with the strength of several men. Emmanuel shouted from the forest edge, urging James to back away slowly. But it was too late. Kega let out a piercing scream that sent birds scattering from the treetops. The other chimpanzees responded instantly. Playful behavior turned into tense alertness. James tried to retreat, but tripped on a root. His precious camera fell to the forest floor. That moment of vulnerability was all Kega needed. The alpha male charged forward with terrifying speed. James had no time to flee. Kega slammed into him like a linebacker, knocking him flat. Air rushed from James's lungs as he hit the ground. Before he could recover, Kega was on him. Powerful arms pinned James with crushing force. The chunt's teeth, larger and sharper than James had ever imagined, flashed as Kega bit into his face. The pain was unbearable, something he had never known. He felt his cheekbone crack under the pressure of the jaws. Emmanuel screamed, trying to distract Kega, but the alpha was fully focused on the attack. 2 other males joined in, grabbing James's legs and biting into his thighs, tearing muscle and rupturing arteries. As James Harrington lay dying on the forest floor, clarity came to him. Years of experience, trust in his connection with the wild, none of it mattered to the chimpanzees. To them, he was not a photographer. He was a threat. Emmanuel survived by climbing a tree, watching in horror until the chimpanzees finally disappeared into the woods. When rescuers arrived, they found James's body mangled, but his camera untouched. The memory card held the final photo he had taken. Kega staring directly into the lens. The gaze held no human-like emotion, only something ancient and unknowable. The photograph received posthumous acclaim. Its power captivated viewers around the world. But few understood they were staring into the eyes of the creature that had ended a man's life. James's body was sent home to Boston. Emmanuel never again entered the deep forest, and in Katabi, Elder Mutara told James's story to every visitor, a warning written in blood. Chimpanzees must never be underestimated. But James was not the last to learn that lesson. Far away, in a remote village where people and chimpanzees lived side by side, another tragedy was about to unfold. The village of Massa, on the edge of Uganda's Kabale forest, had long coexisted with its wild neighbors. The locals respected the chimpanzees and kept a safe distance. Amara Nkosi, a 32-year-old midwife and mother of 5, had lived there her whole life. Her husband, Taban, worked as a guide for forest researchers. He was the first to notice the changes. In April 2017, as the rainy season began, strange things started happening. Food vanished. Water containers were knocked over. Ominous sounds echoed from the forest after sundown. Taban suspected the chimpanzees. The group's dominant male, Kondo, had died in a brutal fight, and his successor, Mosi, was bolder, more aggressive. Under Mosi, the chimpanzees drew closer to the village, watching and not retreating. The village council initially dismissed Taban's concerns. Chimpanzees had always been nearby, powerful but not dangerous. They reinforced food storage and urged caution, but took no further action. Then things escalated. A field of cassava was destroyed overnight. Clothes disappeared from lines. Villagers saw chimpanzees standing silently at the forest's edge, drumming on branches. One evening, Amara's eldest son, Jabari, ran home in tears. While collecting firewood, 3 chimpanzees followed him, slowly at first, then charging. They retreated only when he reached the village. That night, Taban and several men kept watch. At midnight, they heard panicked cries and eerie hoots, closer than ever before. Their flashlights revealed a dozen chimpanzees patrolling the village perimeter. Stepping onto the clearing, then retreating. The men shouted, banged on pots, and drove them away. But the chimps returned again and again. By morning, the council finally acted. Wildlife authorities were contacted. New rules were enforced. No one was to enter the forest alone. Children had to stay in the village center, and all food was locked away. But it was too late. The chimpanzees were no longer just watching. They were preparing to strike. A response from authorities would take days, but life in Mumbo couldn't stop. The village depended on the forest for wood, food, medicine, and most critically, water. 3 days after the council meeting, their water supply nearly ran dry. No rain had come. Communal containers were empty. Amara's youngest children showed signs of dehydration. She led a group of 7 women, including her daughter-in-law, Nia, deep into the forest toward the spring. They carried machetes and sticks, more for comfort than protection. They set out at noon, planning to return before sunset. The silence was unsettling. No birdsong, no rustling in the underbrush. The usual chatter of the women had faded, replaced by unease. They reached the spring and hurried to fill their containers. The water flowed slowly, delaying their departure. Amara glanced around, sensing that something was wrong. Then Nia froze, eyes wide. Amara followed her gaze. On a low branch sat Mosi, the new alpha male, a scar on his shoulder, telling of past battles. Amara signaled the women to collect the water and slowly returned to the village path. They were nearly there when the forest erupted in noise, panic-stricken cries, the rustling of bodies crashing through foliage. Suddenly, chimpanzees emerged from all sides, no fewer than 5, mostly males, moving directly toward the group of women. Panic broke out. The women dropped their containers and fled, forgetting the planned retreat. Amara yelled for them to stay together, but fear scattered them. Some ran toward the village path. Others veered off in different directions, losing their bearings. Amara ran with Nia and 2 other women, hearing the chimpanzees gaining on them with every second. The forest floor was treacherous. Roots, fallen branches, and uneven ground threatened to trip them at every step. Nia was the first to fall, catching her foot on a root. Her scream pierced the forest. Amara stopped and turned back, unwilling to leave her sister-in-law. The other 2 women hesitated for a moment, then continued running when they saw what was happening. 3 male chimpanzees had already grabbed Nia. The largest, Mosi, seized her arm with incredible strength and pulled her back as she tried to stand. The other two circled, hooting, their fur bristling to appear larger. Amara raised her machete and charged, slashing at Mossy's arm. The sharp blade cut into his flesh, and the alpha male released Nia with a scream of pain and fury. For a moment, Amara thought they might escape. She helped Nia up, and they began to run. They made it about 30 feet before Amara felt a crushing weight slam into her back. Her face hit the ground, the air knocked from her lungs. Mossy had recovered and targeted Amara in retaliation for the wound. What followed was a violent assault. Mossy's powerful hands grabbed Amara's shoulders and flipped her onto her back. His teeth, larger and sharper than a human's, sank into her face. The pain was unbearable. She felt her cheekbone crack under the pressure of his jaws. Other chimpanzees joined in, targeting her limbs with methodical savagery, biting and tearing. One grabbed her right arm and pulled with such force that her shoulder dislocated. Another latched onto her calf, tearing out a chunk of muscle. Through the fog of pain and terror, Amara dumbly heard Nia's screams, the approach of more chimpanzees, the snapping of branches, the pounding of feet. Then, mercifully, everything went dark. Shatalata didn't escape the initial attack but managed to flee, screaming toward the village. Her cries alerted Taban and other men working nearby. They grabbed spears and machetes and ran into the forest, shouting and making noise to scare off the chimpanzees. By the time they reached Amara, the attack had lasted nearly 15 minutes. The chimpanzees scattered, disappearing into the forest with final hoots of defiance. "What's left will haunt the people of Masso for generations," one of them cried. Amara lay motionless on the blood-soaked ground. Her face was unrecognizable, her right arm nearly torn off, large patches of flesh missing from her legs and torso. Taban dropped to his knees beside his wife, but it was immediately clear there was nothing to be done. The other women who had gone for water all survived, though 3 sustained injuries from falls or brief encounters. The village of Imaso plunged into mourning and fear. Anara's body was prepared for burial according to tradition, but the customary 3-day funeral was shortened and held entirely in the center of the village. No one dared approach the forest's edge. Wildlife authorities arrived 4 days after Amara's death. They brought researchers and trackers, specializing in chimpanzee behavior. What they discovered was alarming. The chimpanzee community, led by Mossy, had undergone what scientists called a cultural shift. The death of the previous alpha and Mossy's rise to power had coincided with increasing pressure on their habitat due to illegal logging at the far edge of their territory. The chimpanzees had been forced into closer contact with humans, and under Mossy's leadership, they had lost their fear of people. Even more troubling, they had begun to see humans as prey. The attack on Amara was not random aggression. It was coordinated hunting behavior, similar to how chimpanzees hunt monkeys or small antelope. Authorities relocated the residents of Masso to a new settlement several kilometers away, beyond chimpanzee territory. The original village was abandoned to the forest. Tabon, now a widower with 5 children, found work at a conservation center, using his knowledge to help researchers understand and prevent such conflicts. The chimpanzees remained in the Kabul forest, but their numbers gradually declined due to ongoing habitat loss. Mossy led his group for another 7 years before he was killed in a territorial clash with a neighboring band. Yet the behavioral changes he introduced outlived him. The chimpanzees of Kabul became known among researchers as one of the few documented communities to systematically hunt humans. For the former residents of Mumbo, the forest that had once been their home and sustenance turned into a place of nightmares. They taught their children and grandchildren to respect chimpanzees from a distance, to understand that behind the seemingly human-like expressions and behavior lay wild creatures capable of calculated violence. Most importantly, they taught that the delicate balance between humans and wildlife can shift in an instant, turning years of coexistence into deadly conflict. This wasn't the only brutal attack. Click here to learn about 4 horrifying cases where people were eaten alive by chimpanzees.